The most evil queens in the Bible. Some of the most wicked kings in the Bible were married to equally wicked queens. These women either encouraged their husbands to commit evil or actively committed evil themselves in their husbands' names. One of the most notorious queens mentioned in the Bible is Jezebel, queen of Israel. In ancient Israel, God had commanded the Israelites not to marry heathens, warning them against adopting pagan practices. However, King Ahab, one of Israel's most infamous monarchs, ignored God's command and married Jezebel, the princess of Sidon and the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians. This union would mark the beginning of one of the darkest periods in Israel's history. Jezebel, together with her husband Ahab, plunged Israel deeper into idolatry than ever before. The two established the worship of Baal as the dominant religion in Israel. Jezebel, the daughter of a priest king of Tyre and Sidon, brought with her the worship of Baal, a deity associated with fertility, strength, and weather. Her name in Phoenician meant primrose, but in Hebrew, the name Jezebel carried the meaning of garbage, reflecting the contempt in which she was held in the Old Testament. Ahab was already a deeply flawed and sinful king, but Jezebel's influence only made matters worse. According to the Bible, Ahab was considered the most wicked of all the kings of Israel, not only because of his idolatry, but also because of his choice to marry Jezebel. His 22-year reign was marked by unprecedented destruction, as recorded in the Book of Kings. Jezebel used Ahab as a tool to accomplish her wicked plans, and he required little convincing to follow her lead. Their marriage marked a historic moment. It was the first time a king of Israel had allied himself with a heathen princess through marriage. Jezebel made it clear from the beginning that she intended to replace the worship of the Lord with the worship of Baal. Her commitment to Baalism was absolute. She practiced and promoted this satanic cult, silencing anyone who opposed her. The extent of Baal worship in Israel reached a peak during Ahab and Jezebel's reign. In 1 Kings 18:19, the Bible recounts a confrontation where Elijah calls out the prophets of Baal, saying, "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table." This shows Jezebel's direct role in funding and supporting idolatrous worship. Baal worship was not limited to Israel. It also spread into Judah and other regions, evolving into various sects that emphasized different aspects of the god's attributes. Baal was often depicted in sculptures as a powerful figure, wearing a helmet adorned with bull's horns, a symbol of fertility and strength. In one hand, he held a club or mace, representing thunder, and in the other, a spear decorated with leaves, symbolizing vegetation and fertility. Jezebel was not content with simply introducing Baal worship. She actively worked to eradicate the worship of the true God. She used her position as queen to intimidate and eliminate those who opposed her. She was ruthless, ambitious, and unprincipled, driven by a desire for power and control. She was zealous in her devotion to idolatry, sparing no effort to maintain its grandeur. Her influence was devastating, not only for Israel, but also for Judah. The Bible vividly describes her wickedness in 1 Kings 21, which narrates one of the most infamous incidents involving Jezebel and Ahab. Ahab desired a vineyard owned by Naboth, a Jezreelite, which was located near the palace in Jezreel. He wanted to turn the vineyard into a vegetable garden. However, Naboth refused to sell or exchange his land, as Israelite law dictated that ancestral property should remain within the family to which it was originally assigned. As stated in Numbers 36:7, No inheritance of the Israelites shall be transferred from tribe to tribe, for every one of the Israelites shall hold to the inheritance of the tribe of their ancestors. This law was meant to preserve the heritage and identity of Israel's tribes. Ahab was frustrated and sullen after Naboth's refusal. Seeing his distress, Jezebel took matters into her own hands. She devised a sinister plot to seize the vineyard. Her plan involved framing Naboth for blasphemy and treason. She orchestrated a sham trial, brought false witnesses against Naboth, and had him falsely accused and executed. With Naboth out of the way, Jezebel handed the vineyard over to Ahab. This event epitomizes the depths of Jezebel's wickedness. She showed no regard for justice, morality, or the sanctity of God's law. Her actions were driven by greed, manipulation, and a complete disregard for human life. Through her deeds, Jezebel earned her place as one of the most reviled figures in biblical history. Ahab and Jezebel's reign ended in tragedy, as prophesied by Elijah. Both met gruesome deaths as a direct consequence of their sins. Ahab was killed in battle, and Jezebel met her end when she was thrown from a window by her own servants. Her body was devoured by dogs, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy that she would die in disgrace, 2 Kings 9:36-37. Jezebel's legacy serves as a stark warning about the dangers of idolatry, unchecked ambition, and the consequences of turning away from God. Her story reminds us of the destructive power of sin and the ultimate justice of God. Jezebel's cunning schemes and manipulative tactics stand as one of the darkest chapters in the Bible. When King Ahab returned home grumpy and disheartened after Naboth refused to sell him his vineyard, Jezebel stepped in with chilling confidence. She assured her husband, "Don't worry, the vineyard will soon be yours." 1 Kings 21:8-16. Jezebel wasted no time. She wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with his royal seal, and sent them to the elders and nobles of Naboth's city. In her letters, she commanded, "Proclaim a fast, and seat Naboth in a place of honor before the people. But place 2 wicked, unprincipled men opposite him. Let them accuse him, saying, 'You have cursed God and the king.' Then take him out and stone him to death." The elders and nobles, fearing the queen's wrath, carried out her instructions to the letter. They declared a fast and seated Naboth in a prominent position among the people. 2 men, despicable and corrupt, came forward and accused Naboth of blaspheming against God and the king. Without a proper trial or evidence, Naboth was dragged out of the city and stoned to death. When word of Naboth's death reached Jezebel, she informed Ahab, "Get up and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to sell you." Naboth is no longer alive, but dead. Ahab, now emboldened by his wife's actions, rose and went to claim the vineyard. Jezebel's deviousness didn't stop at Naboth's death. She ensured that Naboth's sons were also killed, eliminating any heirs who might have a legal claim to the vineyard. Her evil was calculated and thorough. This was not merely about securing a plot of land. It was about ensuring her husband's unchecked power and her own dominance. But Jezebel and Ahab's wickedness did not go unnoticed by God. As Ahab approached the vineyard to seize it, the prophet Elijah confronted him with a stern and fiery message. Elijah declared, "Have you murdered and also taken possession? In the place where dogs licked the blood of Naboth, dogs will lick your own blood." 1 Kings 21:19. Elijah pronounced even more damning judgment. He warned Ahab that his lineage would be wiped out, his descendants would not receive proper burials, and Jezebel's body would be devoured by dogs in Jezreel. These chilling words foretold the end of Ahab's dynasty and the brutal downfall of Jezebel. This harsh judgment underscored the gravity of Ahab's sins. The Bible records, "There was no one like Ahab, who sold himself to do evil in the sight of the Lord, urged on by his wife Jezebel." 1 Kings 21:25. Despite this, when Ahab heard Elijah's pronouncement, he was struck with fear and humbled himself before God. He tore his clothes, fasted, and repented in sackcloth. Seeing Ahab's repentance, God showed mercy, delaying the full extent of the judgment until after Ahab's death. But Jezebel's judgment would remain firm. Jezebel's sins extended beyond her conspiracy against Naboth. Her reign of terror was marked by a relentless pursuit of idolatry and the persecution of God's prophets. In 1 Kings 18:4, we learn that Jezebel ordered the slaughter of the Lord's prophets. However, Obadiah, a faithful servant of God, secretly hid 100 prophets in caves, providing them with food and water to keep them safe from Jezebel's wrath. Her hatred for Elijah, the prophet of God, was especially fierce. After Elijah's dramatic victory over the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, where he called down fire from heaven to prove the power of the one true God, Jezebel vowed revenge. She sent a threatening message to Elijah saying, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them." 1 Kings 19:2. Elijah, overwhelmed by fear and exhaustion, fled for his life. He journeyed into the wilderness, where he prayed for God to take his life, saying, "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." 1 Kings 19:4. But God, in his compassion, sustained Elijah, providing him with food and water, and strengthening him for the journey ahead. The story of Jezebel is a sobering reminder of how unchecked sin and the abuse of power can lead to devastating consequences. Her manipulative schemes, idolatry, and violence ultimately led to her ruin. Just as Elijah prophesied, Jezebel met a gruesome end. In 2 Kings 9:30-37, she was thrown from a window by her own servants, and her body was trampled underfoot and devoured by dogs. Through this narrative, we see the justice of God, the power of repentance, and the consequences of evil. Ahab's moment of humility brought a measure of mercy, but Jezebel's unrepentant heart led her to destruction. These events remind us that God sees all, knows all, and will hold all accountable for their actions. The vineyard of Naboth was a small piece of land, but the story surrounding it carries timeless lessons. It is a testament to the importance of justice, the dangers of greed, and the ultimate authority of God over all human schemes. Elijah was overwhelmed by despair. He traveled a day's journey into the wilderness, leaving his servant behind. Exhausted and distraught, he sat down under a juniper tree and cried out to God, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." The weight of his mission, coupled with the threats against his life, drove him to the edge of hopelessness. But Elijah's story was far from over. In his fear and exhaustion, he fled further, eventually making his way to Mount Horeb. This was the same mountain where God had revealed himself to Moses generations earlier. It was here that Elijah would experience the still, small voice of God, a reminder that the Lord's power is not always displayed in dramatic, overwhelming events, but often in quiet, transformative whispers. Elijah's journey set the stage for events that would fulfill prophecy. Years after his confrontation with King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, Ahab was killed in battle against the Syrians, just as Elijah had foretold. Jezebel, however, continued her reign of terror, clinging to power for nearly a decade after Ahab's death. But Elijah's prophetic mission didn't end there. Before he was taken up into heaven, Elijah passed his mantle to Elisha, his chosen successor. Elisha carried forward the divine mission to cleanse Israel of Baal worship and idolatry. Among Elisha's first acts was commissioning Jehu, a fierce military commander, to become the next king of Israel. Jehu's rise to power would ignite a civil war as he challenged Ahab and Jezebel's son, King Jehoram. Jehu's name would be etched into history for his zeal in executing judgment on Ahab's house. Jezebel, who had become the very symbol of cunning, cruelty, and malice, met a gruesome end. As Jehu rode into the city of Jezreel, Jezebel mocked him from her palace window, taunting, "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" But Jehu was unmoved. He called out to her servants, her chamberlains, and commanded them to throw her down. They obeyed, and Jezebel fell from the window, where her body was trampled underfoot and consumed by street dogs. This fulfilled Elijah's chilling prophecy after the murder of Naboth. In the place where dogs licked the blood of Naboth, dogs shall lick your blood, even yours. 1 Kings 21:19. Jezebel's legacy was so infamous that her name became synonymous with wickedness. Centuries later, the book of Revelation would invoke her name as a warning. Nevertheless, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet. By her teaching, she misleads my servants into sexual immorality and the eating of food sacrificed to idols. Revelation 2:20. But if you thought Jezebel was the worst, let me introduce you to her daughter, Athaliah, Queen of Judah. Like her mother, Athaliah's reign was marked by treachery and evil. She was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel and was married to Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. True to her lineage, Athaliah proved herself just as wicked as her parents, perpetuating the legacy of Baal worship in Judah. Athaliah's name, meaning afflicted by God, was fitting for her notorious rule. She sat on the throne of Judah, a throne meant to carry forward the promises God made to David, but her actions desecrated its sanctity. Her reign from 841 to 835 BC was a dark chapter in Judah's history. She ruled during an era of widespread idolatry, surrounded by a line of wicked kings and queens who defied God. Her husband, Jehoram, was no better. Unlike his father, Jehoshaphat, who sought to honor the Lord, Jehoram was corrupt and oppressive. When he died in 841 BC, their son Ahaziah ascended the throne at the young age of 22. Ahaziah, under Athaliah's influence, was just as wicked. The Bible makes it clear. His mother was his counselor to do wickedly. 2 Chronicles 22:3. Ahaziah's reign was short-lived, less than a year, before he was assassinated. His death was tied to a series of events that also fulfilled prophecy. While visiting King Jehoram of Israel, his uncle and Ahab's son, both kings were killed by Jehu, the very man Elijah and Elisha had anointed to bring God's judgment on Ahab's family. Jehu's ruthless campaign was part of God's plan to rid Israel of Baal worship and to put an end to the dynasty of Ahab. Jehu's actions, including the slaying of Jezebel and her descendants, were a direct fulfillment of Elijah's prophecies. After Ahaziah's death, Athaliah seized the throne of Judah by force. In a shocking display of cruelty, she ordered the murder of all royal descendants who could challenge her claim to power. Her goal? To exterminate the line of David, the very lineage through which the Messiah would come. Yet, even in the midst of her treachery, God's promise to David stood firm. Unknown to Athaliah, one of the royal heirs, a baby named Joash, was hidden away by his aunt Jehosheba and her husband, Jehoiada, the high priest. For 6 years, Joash was kept safe in the temple, while Athaliah ruled in darkness. Athaliah's reign eventually came to a violent end. In the 7th year, Jehoiada orchestrated a coup to crown Joash as the rightful king. When Athaliah heard the noise of celebration and saw Joash crowned, she cried out, "Treason! Treason!" But her cries were in vain. Jehoiada ordered her capture, and she was executed outside the temple. The people of Judah rejoiced as the rightful heir to David's throne was restored, and the covenant with God was renewed. Athaliah's life and death serve as a stark reminder of the consequences of defying God's will. She, like Jezebel, sought to undermine God's plans, but ultimately, her schemes failed. Through it all, God's faithfulness to his promises endured, ensuring that the line of David continued, paving the way for the ultimate king, Jesus Christ. These stories of Jezebel and Athaliah are sobering, but they also remind us of a powerful truth. No matter how dark the times, God's purposes cannot be thwarted. He remains sovereign, working through history to fulfill his promises. When Athaliah learned that her son was dead, she unleashed a horrifying plan. Determined to secure her grip on power, she began to systematically destroy the entire royal family of the House of Judah. But in this dark moment, a courageous woman named Jehosheba intervened. Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram and the sister of the late King Ahaziah, could not stand idly by. She took young Joash, the infant son of Ahaziah, and hid him away, rescuing him from certain death at the hands of his ruthless grandmother. Jehosheba stole Joash from among the royal princes who were being executed. With the help of Joash's nurse, she hid him in a bedroom. This wasn't an impulsive act, but a calculated risk born out of both faith and courage. Jehosheba, married to Jehoiada, the high priest, found refuge for the child in the temple of God. There, Joash was kept hidden for 6 long years, right under Athaliah's nose, as she reigned over the land. Athaliah, the self-proclaimed queen, was completely unaware that a single descendant of the royal line had escaped her massacre. Athaliah's actions were not just the result of ambition or desperation. They were part of a much larger, darker plot. Satan, the ancient adversary, was the hidden force behind this savage massacre. His aim was clear: to cut off the messianic line promised in Genesis 3:15, the line through which the Savior, Jesus Christ, would one day come. But God's plans cannot be thwarted. Jehovah moved Jehosheba to act decisively, preserving the child who would ensure the continuation of David's royal lineage. Jehosheba's husband, Jehoiada, played a pivotal role in protecting and raising Joash during these perilous years. Being the high priest, he had access to the sacred temple, a place Athaliah had desecrated with her devotion to Baal. For 6 years, Joash remained hidden in the sanctuary, cared for and nurtured by Jehoiada and Jehosheba. These 6 years were not just a time of waiting, but a period of preparation for what was to come. Athaliah, who had already lost her husband and son, ruled with a ruthless hand. Her reign was marked by her allegiance to Baal, the Canaanite god of fertility and storms. This was no surprise, given her heritage. As the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, she had grown up in a household steeped in pagan worship. She brought these practices to Judah, using even the sacred treasures of the temple of God to fund her idolatrous activities. Athaliah's actions not only defiled the temple, but also corrupted the spiritual life of the nation. However, despite her efforts to eliminate the royal family, one child remained, a symbol of hope and God's faithfulness. Unbeknownst to her, Joash lived and grew, protected by the very God she had forsaken. Athaliah's story is a stark reminder of the destructive power of idolatry and the lengths to which evil will go to oppose God's purposes. When Joash turned 7, the time came to act. Jehoiada, the high priest, carefully orchestrated a plan to restore the rightful king to the throne. He summoned the Levites and the leaders of Judah, swearing them to secrecy. Guards were placed around the temple to ensure the child's safety. Then, in a dramatic public ceremony, Joash was brought out before the people. Jehoiada placed a crown upon his head and presented him with the testimony, the Mosaic Law. The young boy was anointed as king, and the people erupted in celebration, clapping their hands and shouting, "Long live the king!" The joyous noise of the coronation reached Athaliah, and she hurried to the temple to investigate. What she saw must have struck fear into her heart. There stood Joash, the child she thought she had eliminated, wearing the royal crown. Surrounding him were officers, trumpeters, and the people of Judah, all rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Musicians played, and praises filled the air. Athaliah tore her robes in rage and shouted, "Treason! Treason!" But her cries fell on deaf ears. The people knew the truth. She was the usurper, not Joash. Jehoiada acted swiftly. He ordered the guards to remove Athaliah from the temple to avoid defiling the sacred space with bloodshed. She was taken to the palace grounds and executed. Her reign of terror had come to an end, and Judah was finally free from her corrupt and idolatrous influence. The story of Joash's preservation and Athaliah's downfall is a powerful testament to God's sovereignty and faithfulness. Despite Satan's attempts to destroy the royal line, God's promise endured. Through Jehosheba and Jehoiada's courage and obedience, the lineage leading to Jesus was preserved. It is a reminder that even in the darkest times, God is at work, fulfilling his promises and protecting his people. Joash's reign, which began in such a dramatic fashion, would go on to restore the worship of the true God in Judah. His story is a vivid example of how God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary purposes, ensuring that his plans prevail against all odds. Inside the temple, Athaliah's grasp for power. Just inside the temple, Athaliah, a queen infamous for her atrocities in Judah, was taken to the horse gate, where she met her end. This was the culmination of a life driven by ruthless ambition and a thirst for power. Some people rise to positions of authority out of a deep passion for their cause and a sense of duty. Others, however, desire leadership for no other reason than the pursuit of power, relishing the arrogant feeling of superiority it brings. It doesn't take long to discern the kind of leader someone is. In the case of Athaliah, her character became abundantly clear almost immediately. The moment Athaliah learned that Jehu had killed her son, King Ahaziah, she acted swiftly and without mercy. Consumed by her ambition, she set out to secure the throne by annihilating all the royal heirs of the house of Judah, including her own grandchildren. In her bloodthirsty rampage, she believed she had successfully wiped out every potential rival. But one child survived, Joash, the last remaining heir. Joash was spared thanks to the courage and faith of Jehosheba, a devout young woman. She secretly hid the boy in the temple of God, protecting him for 6 years. While Athaliah ruled with an iron fist, Joash was raised under the care of the priests, shielded from her deadly ambitions. It's worth pausing to reflect on the magnitude of Athaliah's actions. The Lord had made a promise to his people, a promise that the Messiah would come through the royal line of David. Yet Athaliah, blinded by her desire for power, showed no regard for this divine covenant. She was willing to destroy God's chosen line, even if it meant killing her own family. For 7 long years, Athaliah ruled over Judah. Her reign was marked by tyranny, godlessness, and relentless efforts to maintain her illegitimate grip on the throne. In the end, however, the people of Judah rose up against her. They removed her from power violently, ensuring she could do no further harm. Athaliah's story serves as a stark example of a leader whose motivations were not rooted in love, duty, or service, but in selfish ambition, prestige, and an insatiable hunger for authority. It's easy to recognize the difference between leaders who serve out of love and those who rule for power. It never takes long for the truth to surface. Herodias, the queen who couldn't forgive. Herodias, the Queen of Galilee, is remembered in history for one of the most heinous acts recorded in the Bible, orchestrating the execution of John the Baptist. Her name is forever associated with betrayal and cruelty, a chilling reminder of how unchecked anger and pride can lead to unthinkable acts. Herodias was originally married to Philip, the brother of Herod Antipas, also known as Herod the Tetrarch. But in an unlawful and scandalous act, she left Philip and married Herod Antipas, while her first husband was still alive. This open violation of God's law did not go unnoticed. John the Baptist, bold and unwavering, spoke out against this sinful union. "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife," John declared, pointing to the commands of Mosaic law, Mark 6:18. His words enraged Herodias. Her pride could not bear the public condemnation, and she developed a deep grudge against John. She wanted him dead. Herodias's hatred, however, was initially thwarted. Herod Antipas, though he had John arrested and imprisoned, hesitated to execute him. He feared the reaction of the people, who regarded John as a prophet. More than that, Herod himself recognized John as a righteous and holy man. Though perplexed by John's teachings, he found himself drawn to listen to him. But Herodias's bitterness would not be extinguished. Her moment came during Herod's birthday banquet. The celebration was lavish, filled with the region's most influential officials, nobles, and military commanders. As the night progressed, Herodias's daughter, Salome, performed a dance that greatly pleased Herod and his guests. In a moment of impulsive enthusiasm, Herod made a reckless vow. "Ask me for whatever you want, and I will give it to you, up to half my kingdom." Mark 6:23. Salome, coached by her mother, returned with a chilling request. "I want you to give me the head of John the Baptist on a platter." Herod was horrified. Deeply grieved, he knew the demand was unjust. Yet, bound by his rash oath and unwilling to appear weak before his guests, he reluctantly ordered John's execution. An executioner was sent to the prison where John was beheaded. His head was brought back on a platter, handed to Salome, and then given to Herodias. In that moment, Herodias achieved her long-sought revenge, but at what cost? Lessons we learn. Both Athaliah and Herodias offer cautionary tales about the destructive power of unchecked ambition and pride. Their stories force us to confront uncomfortable questions. What happens when a thirst for power overtakes a sense of morality and duty? How often do pride and resentment blind us to the truth, leading us to harm others and ourselves? From Athaliah, we see the devastating consequences of power pursued for its own sake. Her willingness to destroy her own family shows us that ambition unchecked by love or conscience leads to ruin. From Herodias, we learn the dangers of nursing bitterness and holding grudges. Her refusal to forgive John the Baptist ultimately consumed her, driving her to manipulate others to achieve her selfish ends. Both women remind us that leadership and influence must be guided by humility, love, and a sense of responsibility. When pride and ambition take center stage, the results are catastrophic. Their stories challenge us to examine our own hearts. Do we seek to serve others, or are we driven by selfish desires? Do we allow bitterness to fester, or do we choose forgiveness and peace? The Bible continually calls us to a higher standard of leadership, one modeled after Christ.
Do you love
who came
meaningful
not to be
Bible
served,
stories?
but
Top
to
7
serve.
Bible Stories
Matthew
channel will bring you
20:28.
inspiration and
Let
peace
us
every
strive
day.
to lead lives
Don't
of
forget to
humility,
like and share your
grace,
thoughts
and
in the
love,
comment section.
rejecting the destructive
Your sharing is the
paths of
motivation
Athaliah
for us to
and
bring more
Herodias.
stories. Top 7 Bible Stories. Good stories, beautiful meanings.